October 17th.
Oh, look at you.
National Day for the Eradication of Poverty. This day
That's a weird way to start the stream. Madam Speaker going, oh, look at you. Welcome to the live stream, everybody. What is this? Tuesday, October 17th. Justin Trudeau is scheduled to be in the House. It's going to be a great one. Before we get into it, though, I want to encourage everyone to give a like on the stream. Check to see if you're subscribed. It's absolutely free to do so. Every new subscriber is a Liberal in Canada that cries. And if you want to support the channel, you can find a I love oil and gas sticker, or I did not see that coming, down in the description or the pinned comment of this live stream. And without further ado, let's get into QP. Right now they're doing questions or statements by members.
A nonprofit with over 5
Goes on for about 10 minutes.
across the country for their more than 30
And then
years of work.
everyone, all the A-team politicians will start filing into the House
Poverty in Canada
or onto the floor rather, and they will start question period.
L'honorable député de Saskatoon.
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon Grasslands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to pay tribute to the late Mark Tennant. For over a quarter century, Tennant was the face of the University of Saskatchewan women's volleyball program. He coached the Huskies to 3 straight national titles, 1979, 1980, and 1981. He was named National Coach of the Year 4 times in his career. Mark Tennant's contribution to the sport of volleyball spanned over 4 decades as a player, as a coach, technical leader, and international representative. He was inducted into numerous halls of fame. Tennant single-handedly changed the game, establishing Super Volley, one of Canada's largest and most prestigious open tournaments, which ran for over 20 years. Our deepest sympathies to his wife, Gail, and their 3 children, Darcy, Derek, and Brianne, and grandson, Wick.
L'honorable député de
The Honourable Member for Scarborough North.
October 16 is World Food Day, established by the United Nations to drive change and raise awareness on worldwide hunger and poverty. One of the organizations doing just that is the Canadian Food Grains Bank, a national partnership of 15 Canadian churches and church-based agencies acting for the future of food. Today, food grains representatives from across the country are here in Ottawa for Hunger on the Hill, meeting with elected officials to discuss the global food crisis. They are engaging in courageous conversations about the connections between food systems and climate change, gender equality, and food insecurity. As the world experiences a period of heightened conflict, sustainable solutions are now more important than ever. Tonight, I am co-hosting this year's parliamentary reception with Food Grains, and I invite all parliamentarians to join us in the fight against hunger. Merci.
I had no idea. L'honorable député de Lac.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, since Hamas's terrorist attacks in Israel, there have been acts of violence around the world that threaten to spread the conflict in the Middle East to the rest of the world.
It's getting pretty crazy.
A few days, a teacher in France was killed by a former
The Hamas protests, yeah.
radicalized. In Belgium, 2 Swedish tourists were murdered in the name of the Islamic State. And in the United States, a landlord killed a 6-year-old child and seriously injured his mother because they were Muslims. This killing spree must stop, Mr. Speaker. No one can use the depth of their anger as an excuse to take the law into their own hands. There is no prospect of peace down this road. There is only the risk of a chain reaction leading to even more violence and even more tragedy. The Bloc Québécois deplores the loss of innocent victims. We express our solidarity with their loved ones, and we firmly condemn all those
Just a reminder, everyone,
sink into hatred that serves
hit that
no
like
other
button.
cause than that of chaos.
There's a few hundred people watching.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Let's get those likes up so we can get more people filing in.
L'honorable député de West Vancouver.
The Honourable Member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Exactly 5 years ago today, Parliament passed the Cannabis Act, legalizing access to recreational cannabis in Canada. It created a $43.5 billion boost to our GDP, 98,000 jobs, and over $1.2 billion a year in tax revenue to the provincial and federal governments. It also created a regulated cannabis market that protects public health, has not increased youth consumption of cannabis, or realized any of the other fears that were raised in the debate in this place. Rather, legalization has meant that people no longer get criminal records for simply possessing cannabis, which has unjustly constrained the ability of Canadians to secure housing, employment, and travel for many decades. Canada became a world leader by legalizing cannabis in 2018, but our experience since shows that we must continue to work on the legal framework to maintain our advantage. We need to reform the regulatory structure that is causing significant challenges to industry and those that would consider joining it. We need to improve enforcement to displace the ever-existing illegal market and facilitate the expungement of records for those that have been criminalized in the past. As this legislation is reviewed, I look forward to working with all members in this place to bring these and other changes into effect.
Colleagues, I made an error by calling a member up to chat with me at the chair, and in doing so, I had blocked the camera shot of the honourable member from Saskatoon-Grasswood. So I'm allowing the member to make his declaration, adding it in, so he can continue his declaration now. The honourable member from Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we say in showbiz, a redo. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay the tribute to the late Mark Tennant. For over a quarter century, Tennant was the face of the University of Saskatchewan women's volleyball program. He coached the Huskies to 3 straight national titles, 1979, 1980, and again in 1981. He was named National Coach of the Year 4 times in his career. Mark Tennant's contribution to the sport of volleyball spanned over 4 decades as a coach, as a player, technical leader, and international representative. He was inducted into numerous halls of fame. Tennant single-handedly changed the game of volleyball by establishing Super Volley, one of Canada's largest and most prestigious open tournaments, which ran for over 20 years. Our deepest sympathies go out to his wife, Gail, their children, Darcy, Derek, and Brianne, and grandson, Wick. Thank you.
The honourable member for Surrey.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to a great Canadian, Corporal Lawrence Robideau, a veteran who paid the ultimate price during the Korean War. Corporal Robideau was born in Radville, Saskatchewan in 1928 to parents Joseph and Eva. He would move to Rhode Island following World War II, and Lawrence would join Company B, 1st Battalion, 35th Infantry Regiment, U.S. Army at age 19. In June 1950, his battalion was the first to be sent into Korea. And in November of that year, Corporal Robideau and 77 others were officially listed as MIA, missing in action. For 60 years, his family tried to locate his remains, and in January 2023, through DNA testing, the Army announced that he had been found. Sadly, he died as a prisoner of war in North Korea in May of 1951. This past Friday, Corporal Robideau's remains were laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors, giving some much-deserved peace and closure to his family. His country needed him. He answered the call. We shall not forget.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Halifax West.
Speaker, on October 18, we celebrate the courage of the famous 5. Trailblazing women who in 1929 succeeded in the challenge to the Supreme Court when they referred the matter to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, thus leading to the historic decision that yes, women were indeed persons and could become senators. The new definition was then adopted by many countries that the word persons always means women and men. Last week, I was proud to attend and speak at the unveiling of the famous 5 maquette at Mount St. Vincent University, a fitting host given that the Mount is celebrating its sesquicentennial 150 years of opening its doors to women and girls. Thank you to the leadership at the Mount, famous 5 Foundation CEO Francis Wright, and maquette sculptor Barbara Person, and all women leaders who contributed to such a meaningful event.
Who's ready for Pierre and Trudeau today?
Mr. Speaker, the violence in Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel have left many Canadians in deep pain and in a state of trauma. My neighbours in Milton have shared how the violence and bloodshed have caused them immeasurable pain, fear, and heartbreak as well. Islamophobia, anti-Arab racism, and anti-Semitism are on the rise in Canada, and that's a direct result of the violence in the Middle East, and this is completely unacceptable. I unequivocally condemn the brutal terrorist attacks by Hamas on innocent Israelis, and I want to reiterate the words of the Prime Minister. Hamas are not freedom fighters or a resistance. They are terrorists, and they do not represent the very legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. Nothing justifies violence against innocent civilians. This senseless violence must end immediately. I call for the release of all hostages, strict adherence to all international law, and I urge the establishment of a safe humanitarian corridor for essential aid for Gazans. Everyone I've talked to is desperate for genuine allyship and support. We must be there for one another. As Canadians, we're an example to the world of how neighbours of different backgrounds can live in harmony, how diversity is a strength, and that peaceful coexistence is always something worth striving for.
Canada's even thinking about sending in aid into Gaza.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, mortgage rates, the cost of food and fuel is making it impossible for Canadian families to live. I've heard from neighbours and friends who have expressed that the NDP Liberal government are out of touch with Canadians and are driving in the wrong direction. This Prime Minister promised to bring down the cost of food, but Mr. Speaker, Thanksgiving has come and gone and food costs continue to escalate. And with the exception of only one Liberal member of Parliament, the NDP Liberal coalition continues to support increased costs of production and transportation by food by supporting the carbon tax. The only thing that this carbon tax is doing is uniting Canadians against the carbon tax. Canadians are exhausted, they are desperate, and they are failing and falling far behind. Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve relief, and this Prime Minister is not worth the cost.
The Honourable Member for Oakville North Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mary Lamb, a palliative care pioneer, passed away recently in Oakville. She became the Director of Nursing at Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital in the 1980s, where she and her colleagues helped to pioneer the development of a palliative care program at the hospital. Mary's passion for dying with dignity led her back to the Royal Vic for special training in palliative care. Mary always said it's not about quantity of life, but quality of life. In 1983, she hired the first part-time palliative care coordinator at OTMH. She always had a deep passion for promoting evidence-based care practices, which led her to her interest in therapeutic touch, a recognized modality with the College of Nurses in Ontario. I presented Mary with a well-deserved Queen's Platinum Jubilee Pen in honour of her work to ensure that all people in Canada can die with dignity. To Heather and her family, my deepest sympathy. Know her work and her legacy will live on.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal government, after 8 long years of disastrous management, the government is introducing a second carbon tax with the help of the Bloc Québécois. The Bloc wants to drastically increase the carbon tax and has voted with the government twice. The Bloc isn't thinking about Quebecers who are struggling to make ends meet or about families or seniors. It's not thinking about them when it supports a second carbon tax.
Reminder to drop a like on the stream, everyone.
The food on your plate costs
Let's
more.
get the likes
Voting
up to a
Bloc
couple
means it
hundred.
costs more to fuel up your car. Voting Bloc means housing costs more. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the Bloc voted for repealing minimum sentences and the Bloc voted against our motion on housing. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government is tired, shop-worn, and Canadian families are facing thousands of dollars in new costs because of this government's massive deficits and punitive tax hikes. The Liberal government will not be cancelling its second carbon tax in Quebec, tax which is supported by the Bloc. Don't let yourself be fooled by the Bloc Québécois, which supports the Liberal NDP coalition. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia. Heading.
On October 7th, the world woke up to an unspeakable horror. Hamas terrorists brutally invaded Israel, intentionally killing over 1,000 Israeli civilians and taking hostage over 100 more. More Jews were killed that day than on any single day since the Holocaust for no other reason than they were Jewish. They were children, babies, men, and women. They were young people just out listening to music at a dance party. This was an unprecedented, brutal, intentional attack. Do not let anyone tell you that Hamas is the legitimate voice of the Palestinian people. It is not a government. Its members
weren't they voted in though? That's what's kind of confusing to a lot of people.
They are not a resistance movement. They are a genocidal, murderous, terrorist death cult, and they must be defeated. Conservatives unequivocally condemn the invasion of Israel by Hamas terrorists and affirm Israel's right to defend itself against these barbaric acts.
That was a good speech.
The Honourable Member for Nickel Belt.
Speaker, I'd like to recognize the significant role that both mining and forestry have in my riding of Nickel Belt, Northern Ontario, and throughout Canada, ensuring economic opportunities for everyone. Strong supply and services, mining companies, part of Mine Connect, provide thousands of good-paying jobs all over Northern Ontario. Last week I chaired a roundtable group in Espanola concerning the closure of a local pulp and paper mill. The municipality has shown really true resiliency and commend the mayor, Gervais, and council for their efforts to support local businesses. Mining and forestry are both at the heart of Northern Ontario's heritage. A highly skilled workforce, good careers to many generations of families, jobs for Indigenous people, and strong culture of innovation. Canada continues to be a global leader for sustainable mining and forestry. As Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Natural Resources and Energy, I ask all the members of this House to say thank you to the countless dedicated workers of the mining and forestry industry and the FAC, Forest Production Association of Canada, and the Mining Association of Canada. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honour the memory of Samoygat Satsan, Mel Bevan, a remarkable leader who dedicated his life not only to his beloved Kitsillis First Nation, but indeed to the advancement of Indigenous people right across this country. Mel wore many hats in his 82 years. He was a band counselor, chief counselor, band manager, chief executive officer, treaty negotiator, consultant, and author. He was also a hereditary chief, a day school survivor, a fluent Somaliac speaker, a father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. Mel's greatest legacy by far was the Kitsillis Treaty, something he spent the last 3 decades of his life negotiating. And when that treaty goes to a ratification vote sometime next year, it will stand as a great testament to Mel's vision and his love for his people, the Gitsilasu. Ntoyaksit Noon, Satsan. May you rest in peace.
The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, October is breast cancer.
All right, everyone, we are moments away from this starting.
Men. Among women, it is the second most common cause.
If everyone can take the time to just take a look at the bottom of the stream or the video,
and around 28,000
and hit that like button if you haven't yet,
disease each year.
That would be certainly appreciated.
Of course, survival rates are improving. That is good news. But in order to do even better, we must continue to detect cancers at an early stage. And, above all, we must continue to support the development of increasingly effective therapies by increasing the budgets that we allocate to research and to enabling who are fighting to recover, and to those fighting for a cure, our hearts go out to you. The Honourable Member for Bay of Kinty.
Mr. Speaker, after inflationary policies in 8 years of this tax and spend EP Liberal government, Canadians are paying more than they ever have for food, over 17% the last 2 years alone. The Prime Minister promised by Thanksgiving he would freeze prices. Perhaps he meant by American Thanksgiving. But it's worse for Canadian families.
That's pretty funny, actually.
8 million Canadians that have a pet. Pet food is up over 25%. Families
no shit.
Food on their tables.
That's why it's more expensive.
Food in their pet bowls. Even pets know that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. The Industry Minister today said he wished he knew what the plans were to lower grocery prices. But Mr. Speaker, the answer was simple. cut the excessive inflationary spending and axe the carbon tax. Because all Canadians know, with grocery prices up 17%, pet food prices up 25%, this government's handling of grocery prices is for the dogs.
The Honourable Member for Mont Royal.
Speaker, Canada's Jewish community has been here since 1760. We have had high and low points in our history.
This guy always looks surprised.
In our lifetime has the 400,000 strong Jewish community in Canada felt so vulnerable. The dramatic rise in anti-Semitism over the last decade has been compounded by Hamas terrorists brutally attacking our friend and enemy Israel. This week, hundreds of Jewish community leaders from across Canada are in Ottawa for a conference presented by CIJA, JSCUIA, and Canada's Jewish Federations. Ils sont ici pour parler directement.
They are here to speak directly to parliamentarians about the anti-Semitism they face online and in their communities. They are here to issue important recommendations for action.
Law Center.
Hackers, bro. I don't know what to tell y'all. Do, 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 do. There's Pierre. There's Trudeau.
Questions.
Oral questions. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
After 8 long years, this Prime Minister isn't worth the cost of mortgages. Housing costs have gone up by 100% since he took power. He printed $600 billion, which brought up property prices and forced people to take on huge mortgages. Then, deficits led to increased interest rates. When will they reverse these inflationary policies and allow Canadians to keep their homes? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The austerity preached by the leader.
Trudeau hasn't even said anything, but drop an L in the chat for him.
Access housing. That's why we're taking bold measures to build more housing, more affordable housing, and building it faster. We're working directly with municipalities all over the country to find ambitious solutions that meet communities' needs to solve the housing problems they're facing. We also have a housing accelerator fund in London and Vaughan and Hamilton, and we just signed a deal with Quebec. We'll continue to be there to help people. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Let's go, Pierre. Let's go, Pierre.
After 8 years of this incompetent Prime Minister, Canadians are already experiencing austerity, whereas the government is living in abundance. And it's not worth the cost. I met a worker at the C-SPAN worksite who bought a normal house in Vancouver, but because of increased interest rates, they're paying over $7,000 for the mortgage, and $4,000 of that is interest. Will the Prime Minister finally put an end to their inflationary policies so that this worker can keep their house? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. What the Leader of the Opposition does not seem to understand, Mr.
Next one is English.
Cuts they're proposing won't help those workers, won't help Canadians. We're in favor of helping Canadians with investments and agreements with municipalities to create more housing while ensuring that we keep the deficit as low as possible in the G7. We have the best GDP to debt ratio, and we've kept our AAA credit rating. Canadians are entitled to know if the Leader of the Opposition wants to cut, and if he does, is he going to cut daycare? Is he going to, where else is he going to cut? Because those are programs that he's campaigned against. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Long, miserable years. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost.
No, sirree.
Massively increased the money supply by $600 billion, inflating housing costs by over 100%. That forced one C-SPAN shipyard worker I met last week to buy a normal house for over $1 million. And now interest rates have gone up because of inflationary deficits, something the Prime Minister promised would not happen. And he's forced to pay $7,500 a month on his mortgage while supporting his 3 kids. Will the Prime Minister reverse his inflationary spending so that this gentleman and his wife and 3 kids can afford to keep their home?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
One thing is clear, the cuts, the austerity that are proposed by the Leader of the Official Opposition would not help that family, would not help Canadians from coast to coast be able to afford a new home. That is or the homes they're living in even. That is why we're continuing to work right across the country to bring ambitious and community-specific solutions to the housing problems they're facing. We've signed Housing Accelerator Fund agreements with London, with Vaughan, with Halifax, with Hamilton, with the province of Quebec, with more to come, Mr. Speaker. The cuts he's proposing won't help Canadians. Our investments, done responsibly, will continue to help Canadians.
The budget will balance itself. Liberal mentality.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Middle-class shipyard worker paying $7,500 a month on his mortgage is living austerity now. The Prime Minister is talking about is abundance for government and austerity for working class people who must carry him and his overpriced bureaucracy around on their backs. Mr. Speaker, this gentleman has 3 kids to raise in their adolescence, paying for their sports while keeping a roof overhead. How does he expect them to pay $7,500 a month to fund his overpriced interest rates that result from his deficits?
Le très honorable Premier Ministre.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is proposing to cut spending. Well, the reality is we have the lowest deficit in the G7. We have the best debt to GDP ratio in the G7.
AAA credit rating?
Preserved our AAA credit rating, Mr. Speaker. We are fiscally...
Bingo already.
As we support people with things like the grocery rebate, with investments that are bringing down inflation, working with the different grocery companies. But the reality is Canadians have a right to know which programs he'd be cutting. Would he be cutting child care for families? Would he be cutting dental care for kids? Would he be cutting pensions for seniors? Because, Mr. Speaker, he has campaigned against all 3 of those measures for Canadians.
That's right. Here, here.
Before the Honourable Leader of the Opposition asks his questions, I'm going to ask members please to restrict your comments to the time that you are recognized by the Chair to have the floor.
Sit down, Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. And what would I cut? I'd start with the $54 million ArriveCan app that is now under police investigation.
Wow.
Then I'd get rid of the $35 billion infrastructure bank that pays bonuses but hasn't completed a single infrastructure project.
I didn't know it was under investigation.
And why don't we throw in the $100 million plus contracts to McKinsey, a company that helped cause the opioid crisis? Speaking of all the forces on Canadian taxpayers, when it comes to the ArriveCan app, which is now under police investigation, he covered up a previous bad behavior under SNC Lavalin. Will he at least cooperate with the RCMP investigation into the ArriveCan app?
Wow. Drop a W in the chat for Pierre. He's not messing around today.
Premier Ministre.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, we see the Conservatives are all about cuts, not about investing and building a stronger future. The reality is I recommend, Mr. Speaker, that the Leader of the Opposition take a ride on the great REM in Montreal that the Canadian Infrastructure Bank helped.
He's going to mention crypto?
Thousands of Canadians see being part of the future in a responsible way. We're going to continue to build a stronger future for Canadians by making the right investments, by keeping fiscally responsible, by staying away from the kinds of cuts that the Conservatives continue to put forward.
Once again, I'm going to ask colleagues.
We're missing crypto mention for the bingo card today.
Have the floor. L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Yesterday, in a spirit of cooperation, I asked a question, or a few questions of the Deputy Prime Minister that perhaps were unexpected. So the answers weren't satisfactory. So I would ask the Prime Minister this time about the group of 5 countries made up of the United States, Germany, Italy, France, and the UK have given themselves an ability to intervene politically and diplomatically. And Canada is not part of it. Yesterday, I asked the Deputy Minister if the Prime Minister talked to President Biden in order to be added to that list. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, like our colleagues know full well, Canada is working very closely with its allies throughout the world. We were involved in a call with foreign ministers of the G7 this morning in order to make sure that assistance gets into Gaza and that we are there to provide humanitarian assistance.
Whoa.
It's a terrible crisis occurring in the region. We've evacuated Canadians and we've worked with our allies. We continue to push for evacuating civilians in affected areas, and we will continue to work with all our allies and to maintain a conversation with all of them. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, humanitarian assistance is important, and of course the international community has to mobilize for it. But it's not just about humanitarian assistance. The Prime Minister's answer is long, and that means no. That means that he's not going to be part of the group that has a great deal more influence than even the G7 in the current context. Yesterday, I proposed that the Prime Minister get together with party leaders so that we would have a confidential meeting in order to be better coordinated and to establish a consensus regarding this crisis that is more important than our debates or political issues here. Will that happen, Mr. Speaker?
You already know the answer.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Yes, Mr. Speaker, that was a very good suggestion. I asked my team to follow up, which they're going to be doing in the coming days, to make sure that various party leaders have access to necessary information. This is a moment for Canadians to be united. I know that people are worried. Various communities throughout the country are scared for their loved ones. They're also frightened for their children and their communities. We are here to reassure people. I think all 338 MPs have a responsibility to reassure people, to emphasize on the shared values that we have, and to be there for each other. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Hundreds of Canadians are stranded in Gaza. We have heard the distressing accounts of Canadian citizens who have been told to evacuate but have nowhere to go. Water, food, and medicine is running out. Canadians waiting at the closed Rafah border crossing are pleading for help, saying they are looking for any glimpse of hope. Lives are at risk. We cannot abandon them or the hostages. Will the Prime Minister ensure today that all Canadians can safely get out of Gaza?
This is interesting. You haven't seen any other country talk about Gaza.
For the past 10 days, we have been directly focused on the safety of Canadians and indeed all innocents in the region. We have effectively airlifted out about over 1,300 people from Tel Aviv.
Someone do a count how many he's done.
And we continue to be extremely concerned about the hundreds of Canadians and their families in Gaza. We're working with the international community. I spoke with President El-Sisi about the Rafah border crossing. I spoke with many allies about that. We are working directly to ensure humanitarian corridors into Gaza and exit for civilians, particularly foreign nationals like Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
That's wild.
Nous devons mettre un terme à la mort.
I didn't even know.
Must put an end
that seemed like
to death and destruction.
69
in Palestine.
In 30 seconds.
We've just found out that it's possible that a hospital was hit in Gaza. New Democrats have asked for hostages' freedom and a ceasefire. Some Liberal MPs have also asked for a ceasefire. But the Prime Minister has not heard these calls. Does the Prime Minister agree that Canada should demand hostages' freedom and a ceasefire? The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Monsieur le Président, nous réclamons la libération des...
From the beginning, we've been demanding hostages' freedom. It's a horrible situation. We also call for maintaining international law and provide humanitarian assistance. It's important to help civilians. News regarding the hospital are absolutely terrible and unacceptable. We're going to make sure we can do everything we can in order to ensure that international law is respected, for civilians to be protected, and for hostages to be freed.
Just remind everyone to smash that like button. Let's try and get over 500.
Remember the middle class and those working hard to join it. Remember, we'll take on more debt so Canadians don't have to. Remember, the budget will be balanced in 6 years. Those were the promises. And after 8 years, there's no talk of the middle class anymore because they're underwater from Liberal NDP spending sprees. And now the budget will be balanced in the year never. So has the finance minister completely lost control of the books? Or is there a new promise this week about when she will actually stop the inflationary spending so that Canadians don't lose their houses?
Well said, well said, well said.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I am always happy to work for the middle class. We are always happy as a government to continue
For some reason,
Conservatives on 2 occasions.
people just don't believe that.
A tax break for the middle class. And now they pretend to care about the middle class. Mr. Speaker, I'm confused. You see, we have legislation on the floor of this House that is going to stabilize grocery prices and that is going to help build more homes from coast to coast to coast in this country. I know many Conservatives are voting in favor of that bill. They've said so publicly. What about the leader of the Conservative Party? Will he vote for this bill?
L'honorable député de Thornhill.
Speaker, it's not working. It's been 8 years, and the only thing that Canadians know after 8 years is that the Liberals are not worth the cost. Canadians are struggling, and the Liberals are continuing their ballooning deficits that drive up inflation. Even the Liberals are saying that deficits increase interest rates. So will the finance minister finally confirm for Canadians that she will balance the budget in a specific year so that interest rates can come down and that Canadians can keep their homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Much, Mr. Speaker, and I would remind my colleague opposite that Canada continues to have the lowest deficit among all G7 countries. I'd also advise her, in case she missed the news this morning, that Statistics Canada has announced that inflation has actually come down in Canada.
I did see that. I don't think anyone believes it, though.
Because our plan is working. But we know that Canadians...
What do you guys think down in the comments? Has inflation gone up or down?
At this very moment, we have legislation that will help to reduce grocery store prices for Canadians. Mr. Speaker, why is it that the Conservatives are playing partisan games with the interests of Canadians and of the middle class?
The Honourable Member for Kenora.
8 years of the NDP Liberal government, the federal deficit is projected to exceed $46 billion this year, according to the independent budget officer. This spending is driving up interest rates and mortgage costs to the point where people are worried that they won't be able to afford it to keep their roof over their head. Mr. Speaker, we know this Prime Minister is not worth the cost, so when will he finally stop his inflationary spending and reduce the deficit so that Canadians can afford to keep their homes?
You have millions of mortgages coming up for renewal, man. It's insane. You're going to have millions of people that lose their house.
The Honourable Member for Outremont.
All at once.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Coming from the Conservatives. But I wonder if they are keeping up with the announcements made by our government. You see, just about an hour ago, we announced new measures that will help to reduce costly banking fees that Canadians have told us are a very real irritant for them. This is real support to Canadians, Mr. Speaker. We're going to enhance low-cost and no-cost checking accounts for Canadians. We are going to make sure that Canadians get repayment relief from their banks, Mr. Speaker. We are acting every single day in the interest of Canadians in order to help them meet the moment, Mr. Speaker. Where are the Conservatives? They're nowhere.
Wait, did Trudeau leave? Did he just walk away? Holy shit, Trudeau just left.
8 years of this government, it is too little too late for many struggling people. But we know this housing crisis brings with it a generational divide.
According to a survey reported on by BNN Bloomberg, nearly 70% of young people have chosen to delay their home purchase, Mr. Speaker. Now, why is that? Well, they cite rising interest rates and rising home prices. That's why people are overpaying for an individual room or simply just trapped in their parents' basement. So I ask again,
I'm speechless.
Why doesn't the government stop their inflationary spending so that Canadians can afford a home?
I did not catch the point at which he left.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
An example of recklessness is the Conservative record on housing. $300 million spent when they were in power on housing.
Wow. L in the chat for Trudeau. That is insane.
Mr. Speaker.
To just get up and walk away in the middle of a debate.
We've put on the table $4 billion for municipalities to assist them to build more units. The City of London, Hamilton, Vaughan have signed on, Mr. Speaker. Other communities are coming to the table. Halifax is there. We have more to do. We're serious on this agenda. They have no plan on this issue.
Here, here.
That is insane.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years,
holy crap.
the economic
lots of L's coming through the chat.
to the Parliamentary Budget Office.
I'll drop some too.
I believe that it could get worse, but it is. More spending and a bigger deficit than planned. Nothing new with this government, which knows just one thing.
I did not see that coming. That's right.
Finally admit that the budget won't balance itself. Take responsibility and
we did not see that coming. Holy smokes, Totes Magoats. That is insane.
Minister. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Conservatives have failed to see what we've introduced. We have an action plan to stabilize the situation for Canadians. The first thing we're going to do is make sure that grocery stores are accountable to Canadians, which the Conservatives would never have imagined.
Oh, my God.
We've helped consumer groups.
Chat is blowing up right now.
Never would have imagined. The Conservatives, who are doing nothing, will they finally help Canadians by voting for C-69 once and for all?
Chihuahua. He still didn't come back. Trudeau just literally got up and left.
Colleagues.
And Pierre's calling it out. Look at Pierre. Oh, my camera's blocking it. Shit. But he's doing this. He's like, where's Trudeau? Where's Trudeau? Oh, they muted it. They muted it. They don't want us to know. That's illegal. He can't just walk up and leave.
What does the minister have to say to Montrealers who have to earn $116,000 a year if they want to buy a home? Elsewhere in Canada, in Toronto, $235,000 or Vancouver, $250,000. It's easy to see why people have lost hope of becoming a homeowner one day. The government abandoned the middle class and our youth. Today's situation's the proof. Will the government commit to ending its inflationary spending so that our young people can one day hope to become a homeowner?
Man, someone has to call it out.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Pierre's getting up too. Pierre and Scheer just got up and left.
Having spoken with Montrealers, I represent a riding in Montreal.
What the fuck is happening?
Are scared that the Conservatives are going to cause us to lose ground. The cuts we can expect from Conservatives, cuts into pensions for our seniors, cuts for families who have young families. Dear colleagues, please, it's important for one person to speak at a time.
Where the hell did Pierre and Andrew Scheer just go?
The Parliamentary Secretary to restart her answer from the top.
Can somebody please fill me in on what the hell's happening right now in the comments?
Answer my colleague, because I know full well that Montrealers are scared that we're going to lose ground with the Conservatives because they're going to cut into pensions for our seniors. They'll cut into subsidies for families, and they certainly will cause us to lose ground when it comes to the environment and fighting climate change. I'm surprised that a Conservative colleague is talking to me about Montreal, because Montrealers right now, I can tell you, they're not interested in the Conservatives' plan.
What the hell is going on?
The honourable member for...
Where are the party leaders?
Mr. Speaker, the CEO of Suncor said this summer to his shareholders that he's tired of fighting climate change. Oh, poor him. According to him, Suncor is too focused on the energy transition and needs to refocus on selling oil and gas. More oil, more pollution. The federal government gave $83 billion in subsidies over the last two budgets to help oil companies to pollute less. Suncor admits that it doesn't even want to try to pollute less, but they still want taxpayer money. A glutton one day, always a glutton. Sincerely, when's the federal government going to cut public funds for Suncor? I would like to ask members once more to not speak when someone has the floor here in the House.
Okay, I'm reading through the comments. There's a lot of comments, guys.
For the
bathroom break for snort.
Signal Hills, specifically.
All the party leaders.
I can hear him in the chamber.
Have just gotten up and left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have good news for my colleague. We've already cut subsidies for oil and gas. We're the first G7 country to do so, and we did it 2 years earlier than our other partners, but we went even further. We've committed to eliminating public funding, which no other G20 country committed to. Thank you. The honourable member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, the CEO...
There's a state of emergency, man. There's got to be something going on here.
According to him, the energy transition is ineffective. You'd think that members would have put pressure on, but no, the Conservatives defended him and prevented me from asking questions. They not only did that, but there's a Conservative that apologized to Suncor on behalf of all Canadians, and the Liberals, they never questioned their subsidies, even if Suncor is planning to produce more oil and pollute more. Mr. Speaker, are the Conservatives and the Liberals on the oil and gas lobby registry? The Honourable Minister. I have more good news for my colleague. We set up measures to make sure that the oil and gas sector does its fair share when it comes to fighting climate change in Canada. Regulations to reduce methane emissions by 40% by 2025, and that's going to be 75% by 2030. That's one of the most ambitious targets in the world. Soon, we've got a regulatory project to limit greenhouse gas emissions for the oil and gas sector, and we are the only oil-producing country in the world to do that. We are committed to fighting climate change and to fighting with the Canadian public to do so. The honourable member for L'Amitis-Matane-Matapédia. S&P Global thinks that Canada is going to be one of the drivers of oil production around the world in 2024 with 5.3 billion barrels of oil that they want to produce. Canada is going to be one of the main sources of increasing the worldwide offer for oil. With the support of Liberals and Conservatives, it's not just fighting climate change, efforts to fight climate change that oil companies are threatening. It's planetary goals that they're threatening. These two parties finally understand that Canada is the driver of a train that's going straight into the wall. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I have more good news for my colleagues from the Bloc Québécois. From 2019 to 2021, our greenhouse gas emissions went down by 50 million tons. That's the equivalent of pulling off 11 million cars from our roads. And my honourable colleagues on the Conservatives don't seem to understand that we are committed to fighting climate change, to developing an economy that's going to be there for decades to come and create thousands of jobs throughout the country.
L'honorable député de Haldeman-Norfolk.
Every day I hear from Canadians that after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, they are unable to pay their bills. Recently, Rob wrote to me telling me that he can barely afford his mortgage payments. And so he and his wife have started to sell off their personal possessions to pay their monthly bills. Wow. He realizes that this Prime Minister just isn't worth the cost. When will this Prime Minister stop his irresponsible...
Leslie Lewis had a great petition going
up inflation.
With immense success.
Interest rates so that Canadians can afford their homes again.
Yeah.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The housing crisis, as we know, is underpinned ultimately by a crisis in supply or the lack thereof. What this government is doing is partnering with municipalities across the country. For federal dollars, municipalities have the chance to build more. In London, for example, 2,000 more units of housing will be built in exchange for a $74 million investment. What we've done also is put forward Bill C-56, which, if you look at it, it's a serious bill that removes the cost of taxes, of GST specifically, for rental construction. They have nothing to say on that.
Here. Then I have Deputy Alderman Norfolk.
The housing crisis is directly related to the inflationary spending. This inflationary crisis is also impacting on communities all across this country, which are losing volunteers. Specifically, some volunteer firefighters have told me that they are unable to afford their mortgages. So they've stopped volunteering, and they've taken on second and third jobs just to make ends meet. When will this Prime Minister admit that after 8 years of this government, they've failed Canadians and they're just not worth the cost?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it terrifies me to think of the reckless cuts that these Conservatives would make on the backs of Canadians. We've supported families with our national $10 a day early learning and childcare program, saving families hundreds, as well as the Canada Child Benefit. The best part, empowering parents, empowering mums and dads to get back into the workforce, giving them economic independence and contributing to our economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of Liberal governance, after 8 years of irresponsible governance, and higher inflation that's leading to higher rates for mortgages, the Deputy Prime Minister proudly said that they would balance the budget in 2028. 6 months ago, no more plan for that. That promise never materialized. Last week, the Parliamentary Budget Officer said that the next deficit would be even higher than the 16% forecast. Are the Liberals aware that their management is entirely irresponsible and it's hurting all Canadians?
Bloc is a little bit part of the problem, too. They keep butting heads with Conservatives.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a great deal of respect for my Conservative colleague. I would like to rectify something. Today, it was confirmed by Statistics Canada that inflation has gone down in Canada. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to his questions, I would also like to note that our government is going to provide an update, provide the fall economic update soon. It's coming soon, as you know, Mr. Speaker, and we will have the numbers available, and he'll be able to analyze them, and I'll be happy to answer his questions.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. That's not the problem, Mr. Speaker. Last year, they said they would get rid of the deficit, but that's not true at all. There is a reality that's affecting more and more young Canadians, and that is anxiety. Today, in a Quebec newspaper, the Journal de Montréal, it said that 61% of young people fear they will never be able to own a home. According to Claude,
it's not just fear, it's
the head of Montreal's United.
It's true.
People say to themselves, we'll never be able to buy. Mr. Speaker, to be young and forced to give up on your dreams is beneath us here in Canada. Is the Liberal government aware of the mess it has created after 8 years of uncontrolled spending?
Just identify as not giving up with your dreams.
Sir. Mr. Speaker, I have a great deal of respect for my colleague for Louis Saint Laurent, but you know what's causing anxiety among young people? It's the idea of the Conservatives forming government, the cuts, and more cuts. That's what people are afraid of, Mr. Speaker. That's what they don't get. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we understand that you need to invest in Canadians, in the economy, and to fight climate change. That's what Canadians expect from responsible government. And the last thing they want, Mr. Speaker, is the Conservatives in office.
collègues. Chers collègues.
Colleagues.
The Chihuahuas. Hey everyone, smash that like button if you haven't yet already. Let's try and get over like 600 or 700 likes.
Island Powell River.
My region has seen the largest increase of unhoused people on record. 106% jump in the Comox Valley and almost 70% in Campbell River. This is a catastrophe. The Prime Minister says housing is not a federal responsibility as people and communities move beyond a crisis point. This while Conservative council members at Campbell River have begun targeting nonprofits who provide essential services to the unhoused. When are the Liberals going to be an actual federal partner and build people homes?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
In fact, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the record, not just in British Columbia, but across the country, this federal government has been a partner to, namely, not-for-profit organizations that are doing the outstanding work on the ground. The result is obvious. 69,000 people who were on the street, no longer on the street. They are housed now, Mr. Speaker, quite often with the wraparound supports that they need to transition to something better. Add to that 122,000 people who are very close to homelessness who are no longer in that position. They are housed as well through the National Housing Strategy. Thank you very much.
L'honorable député de Cowichan-Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' out-of-touch plan of nicely asking rich grocery CEOs to lower prices hasn't worked. Wishing and hoping that rich CEOs will do the right thing won't help families put food on the table. And grocery prices are still going up after 22 months. Canadians expect action, but the Liberals are out to lunch, and the Conservatives, you are all words and have no real plan. Exactly. When is the minister going to get real about helping Canadian families and support the NDP's plan to lower food prices? Hear, hear.
NDP's plan. NDP, if you had a plane, you would cut off your coalition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my
Dummy dum-dums.
question. Mr. Speaker, I can assure you there was nothing nice about my meeting with the 5 grocers in Canada, Mr. Speaker. I expressed to them the frustration of 40 million Canadians who are struggling to put food on the table, Mr. Speaker. And I asked them on behalf of all the Canadians to do their part to stabilize prices in Canada. Mr. Speaker, if all the members of Parliament want to do something to help Canadians, vote for C-56. That is that simple, Mr. Speaker. More competition, lower consolidation, and more food on the table for Canadians.
Dude needs a booster seat. You can barely see him above the table.
Langley City. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canadians want a strong healthcare system that allows them and their loved ones to get the care they need when they need it. Last week, our government signed the first bilateral funding agreement with British Columbia, investing more than $1.2 billion
Andrew Scheer just tweeted.
in the next 3 years to improve access to family health services, support our health workers, and increase mental health and substance use support in BC. Can the Minister of Health please update this House on how the recent agreement will help the healthcare system and impact the lives of British Columbians?
L'honorable ministre de la Santé.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for Cloverdale, Langley City, who continues to be a champion for better health. And
shout out to whoever said in the comments. Thank you.
He's absolutely right. Last week was a huge week for British Columbia and a huge week for Canada. And we saw the investment, yes, of $1.2 billion in collaboration over the next 3 years, but it's part of a 10-year plan to help transform healthcare in BC and indeed across the country. It's going to mean reducing wait times. It's going to mean increasing support for healthcare workers. It's going to mean more support for mental health and substance abuse. It's also going to mean that people in BC can see in indicators exactly how their health system is getting better.
L'honorable député de South Shore St. Margaret's.
After 8 years, the Minister of Industry has just admitted that 40 million Canadians are struggling to put food on the table. 8 years of out-of-control spending by the NDP Liberal government have caused that inflation. This harmful inflation has pushed up interest rates, doubling and tripling mortgage payments and rent. 90% of Maritimers are having to make tough choices between eating, heating, and paying the rent? When will the Prime Minister stop harming Canadians with his inflationary deficits and balance the budget to lower costs on Canadians?
Den herr minister.
Mr. Speaker, down east in Atlantic Canada, we've got a saying, it's called Tory times or hard times. And I'll tell you what people tell me in Atlantic Canada is they're fear of the Conservative cuts. So I'd like to remind a little history lesson what happened.
Oh, dude, we found Sasquatch.
By the party opposite, they closed.
Big Bertha here, who claims to know everything there is about guns.
That centre looked after over 500 call-outs every year. What did we do, Mr. Speaker? We reopened that centre. We know how important search and rescue is for the maritime provinces and Atlantic Canada. Good job.
Den herr député de Margaret. Excuse-moi.
Guys, I need to know. I need some help in the comments as to why all the party leaders just left.
About search and rescue when Canadians can't put food on their table.
I'm aware of the hospital bombing in Gaza.
To sell her dream home because of the increase in her mortgage costs. She doesn't agree that with these Liberals that they've never had it so good. The new projected deficit of $46 billion for this year means higher cost, higher monthly payments for Melody and for all Canadians, including that Liberal minister's constituents. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will the Prime Minister stop harming Canadians?
The hospital bombing was a failed launch by Hamas.
It's a budget to lower costs on Canadians.
Den herr minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what can we expect from the Conservative Party of Canada? Cuts, cuts, and more cuts.
The only thing I should get cut is your hair, woman.
Mr. Speaker, when they were in power...
Looks like my popcorn bowl made its way to your head.
By 1,000. They cut 9 Veterans Affairs offices and 1 in Quarter Brook, Newfoundland. When we formed government, that was the first office that we opened, Mr. Speaker, because we recognize that our veterans need the help and they need the support, and we will be there for them.
Chop, chop. Den herr député Central Nova Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, seniors like Ford Snow of Gander are finding out after 8 years that this Prime Minister and his Liberal NDP coalition are not worth the cost. Reckless inflationary deficits have driven up interest rates, forcing landlords to raise their rents. They've had no choice. Ford's rent's gone up by 22% in a year. He's left with not a nickel to spare. Will the Prime Minister stop his inflationary spending to reduce interest rates, to give renters like Ford a break on their rent?
Den herr minister.
Mr. Speaker, the poverty rate among seniors has gone down significantly since we formed government in 2015, and that's because we've increased the OES, it's because we increased the GIS. It's also because we reversed the Conservative policy of increasing the retirement age to 67. This is a policy that was not announced here in this chamber, nor was it announced in this country. It was announced by the Prime Minister of the day in Davos at the World Economic Forum, where, Mr. Speaker, he also added in that speech, the former Prime Minister, that the Canada pension plan does not need to be changed. On this side of the House, we agree. The question is, do they?
Yeah, the Liberals are more hype when Trudeau's not there. I love that fact. It's actually quite poetic.
Seamus, what's going on in this office? Colleagues?
So the bombing of the hospital that happened this morning, folks, for those that are wanting to know, was a failed airstrike by Hamas. It backfired.
Mr. Speaker,
I just showed that on X.
Anxious about their debt levels. Young people fear they'll never be able to own their own home. That's what a Quebec newspaper said this morning. After 8 years of this Liberal government, with the complicity of the Bloc, our young people are pessimistic about the future. They see that a vote for the Bloc or Liberals will cost them. What new steps will be taken now to help our young people realize their dream of home ownership?
À la propriété.
Excellent point.
The Honourable Minister.
Trudeau's already made a statement about it. By CPAC, right when he left, he already made a statement about the bombing.
And is an excellent example.
And he's wrong.
We're helping young people buy their first home. It's a way to save on your tax return and to have a bigger down payment for your first home purchase. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Then I have
the honourable member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of talk about CBC management these days, and never for the right reasons. The N-word controversy, the podcast that was translated in Paris because the Quebec accent doesn't apparently travel well, and now they sent a memo to their journalists reminding...
Did he say the N-word controversy?
We know that Hamas's heinous attacks are terrorism. Journalists know it. They know how and when to use words, even the most sensitive ones. Will the minister remind CBC management that newsrooms must remain free of political and ideological influence?
Israel did not hit the hospital. It was a failed strike by Hamas. It's all on X, guys.
Been recognized as a terrorist organization and a terrorist group. We have said that repeatedly, and the Prime Minister has said that. But we also believe in an independent CBC. That is what the CBC is.
They cut the funding if they're independent.
Independent journalism. They can't seem to keep their hands out of public institutions, but we will keep working hard to ensure that Canadians get access to
Oh, you dummy dum-dum. Cut the funding then. Cut the funding if they're independent. You idiot.
Colleagues, I frankly could not hear the answer of the member. Colleagues, I genuinely could not hear the answer from the Parliamentary Secretary. Please, I'm going to ask him to start from the top. Please. Colleagues, please, I do ask you so that we could have good decorum in this House. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has made it clear Hamas is a terrorist organization. We have said that. The Prime Minister said that. We will keep saying that. But we will also keep on this side of the House working for an independent CBC that is well-funded to do the good work of Canadians in providing quality journalism. This is, on this side of the House, a priority for us, as it is a priority for all Canadians. And if Conservatives have a challenge or others have a challenge with the CBC, they are welcome to write to the Ombudsman.
Whoa.
The honourable member for Drummond. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives might want to clap a little less loudly. We know that journalists have to be independent, and we want to protect that. And they know all about loaded terminology. They know how to describe what Hamas did on October 7th. That's their job. But for management to issue a directive is something else entirely. It borders on censorship. CBC management are themselves muzzling the press, and they're taking a position that enters into the political debate, which isn't their role. Of course, CBC management is independent, but I'd like to ask the minister, does she think that as a matter of principle, it's desirable for CBC management to interfere in the work of its journalists?
Where's the sound?
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've always been clear. Hamas is a terrorist group that has committed many barbarian acts. That's got to be clear. And when it comes to the translation, obviously CBC is arm's length, but this can certainly be done. We can do a good enough job without having things translated in Paris when it comes to the arts.
Pablo.
They keep cutting the audio feed. Okay, I'm gonna cut the audio feed myself here for a second.
Oh, they're back. And Lennox and Addington.
After 8 long years, one would hope that a government figure out that sound, responsible, economic and monetary policy is key to keeping inflation low. Instead, inflation has nearly doubled what it should be, resulting in massive increases in food, heating, rent, and mortgages. Canadians living paycheck to paycheck recognize that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. And to make matters even worse, we have the NDP supporting this government's fiscal incompetence. So, Mr. Speaker, will this NDP Liberal Prime Minister start listening to Canadians, stop inflationary spending, and cancel the carbon tax?
Thanks, Noah, for the super chat. Your first ever super chat on this stream. Much appreciated.
But I'm really surprised that she's not talking about the historic investment that was done in her riding yesterday, Mr. Speaker. Umicore invested $3 billion, Mr. Speaker, in her riding, creating 600 jobs, Mr. Speaker, for young people to stay in her riding, Mr. Speaker. We are building the economy of the future. We are investing in electric vehicles. Mr. Speaker, she should be rejoicing that we're making smart investment to create growth in this country.
The honourable member from Calgary Heritage.
Grocery inflation up this year over $1,100 for families. Emissions up 2.1%, making Canada 58th out of 63 in its commitments. The job-killing No More Pipelines Bill C-69, coupled with the carbon tax, now quadrupled at precisely the time our energy would secure the world, lower emissions, and guarantee Canadians could eat, heat, and house themselves. Will this Prime Minister admit that after 8 years, his NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost?
Mr. Speaker, it really is shocking that Conservatives are claiming to be on the sides of Canadians and helping them with affordability when, Mr. Speaker, their very allies in the Alberta government, in the UCP, are trying to take the pension plans of Albertans out of the Canada Pension Plan to have a reckless, unstable Alberta plan. Mr. Speaker, while those Conservatives stand on the sidelines and do nothing, we're going to defend Canadian pension plans in Alberta and across the country.
Nobody's going to have a pension. Can't afford to pay into it.
The honourable member from Calgary Confederation.
The Supreme Court has verified what Conservatives have been saying for a long time, and that is that this Liberal government is out of line, out of step, and out of touch when it comes to respecting provincial jurisdiction. Their reckless spending is only outdone by their unconstitutional attack on Canada's energy sector, the very sector that we'll need to pay off Canada's debt. After 8 long, miserable years of this NDP government, Canadians know this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will this government for once work with Canada's provinces and industry and today commit to repeal Bill C-69?
Guys, they keep cutting the audio. I don't know what's going on.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, one of the very sorry things about the conversation that goes on coming from that side of the House is the complete rejection of the need to ensure we have a sustainable environment going forward. That the price of entry in terms of actually building a strong economy means actually having a view about environmental sustainability. When that party was in power, they gutted the environmental assessment process. They destroyed the faith that Canadians had that we were protecting the environment and we were respecting Indigenous rights. We have put in place better rules. We certainly respect the decision of the court, and we will be making the appropriate amendments to ensure the environment is protected and the economy moves forward.
You get it down to the staff, Randy. Next.
Kelly.
L'honorable député de Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel.
The honourable member for Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel.
Happy to join the Minister of Small Business to kick off Small Business Week in Montreal, where we met amazing small businesses such as Camillette Jewelry, Unel, and Coquine. Les Délices Lafrenet, a small business must-try bakery located in my riding, is one of the many businesses that form the backbone of our economy. Can the Minister of Small Business tell us how this government is supporting the hardworking, innovative, and diverse entrepreneurs across our country and who represent 98% of our businesses in Canada?
Great question. L'honorable ministre.
I think we all need a drink after this.
Happy Small Business Week to the small business owners and entrepreneurs all across this country. It was a terrific meeting with some of these incredible folks in Montreal, and I want to thank my colleague for joining me. Since 2018, our women entrepreneurship strategy has helped over 22,000 women start up and scale up. Yesterday, I announced a nearly $3 million investment for l'École des entrepreneurs de Québec to support close to 2,000 women entrepreneurs in Quebec and across Canada. Despite the Conservatives voting against this program and others like it, we will always support Canada's incredible women and minority-owned business. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Media reports reveal the RCMP couldn't pursue their criminal investigation against this Prime Minister and his SNC-Lavalin scandal because he was hiding secret documents from the federal police. If any other Canadian hid documents from the RCMP, they'd end up in jail. But after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, this Prime Minister thinks that he's above the law, and Canadians know that he's not worth the cost. So what are the documents that are so damning that this Prime Minister is hiding them from the RCMP, and why are the NDP trying to help them get off the hook?
Damn.
L'honorable ministre.
Mr. Speaker, as the RCMP have confirmed, there is no active investigation. The case is closed, and authorities did not pursue any charges. My honourable friend knows very well, Mr. Speaker, the RCMP operations are conducted independently from government, and if he has operational questions for them, I would suggest he contact the RCMP.
Yeah.
They cut the feed again. Stop cutting the feed.
Mr. Speaker, the Iranian regime supports Hamas and is responsible for death and destruction throughout the world. Yesterday, I asked the House to support my bill, C-350, to list Iran's IRGC as a terrorist organization and therefore to shut down their operations in Canada. But Liberals refused. After 8 years, why are Liberals still refusing to hold this regime accountable? And why are they continuing to allow the IRGC to operate here in Canada?
Here, here. L'honorable ministre.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. Speaker, it's well known that Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. We share the understandable concern of many Canadians.
I don't think they do, though.
To Iran's role in the state sponsorship of terrorism. As my colleague knows, decisions around listing terrorist entities are based on the advice of our security professionals. I have obviously
like the Freedom Convoy.
State this advice for the government.
What a joke!
Take all the necessary decisions as soon as it's appropriate.
What a friggin' joke!
L'honorable député d'Abbotsford.
Once again, we hear reports of Canadians crying out for help with their mental health, but being offered assisted death instead. This government refused to listen to mental health experts, to veterans, to disabled people, to Indigenous Canadians. They didn't listen to the family whose mother begged for help, but instead was euthanized before her kids could even say goodbye. Canadians overwhelmingly oppose this overreach on assisted suicide. Tomorrow we can end this madness by passing Bill C-314. Will the government give Liberal MPs a free vote? To the whip, yes or no?
Good job.
It's really pissing me off that they keep cutting the audio.
L'honorable ministre.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. The mental health of Canadians is a fundamental priority for me and everyone in this chamber. The issue about MAID is a deeply personal and complex choice. It involves a balancing of protecting the vulnerable as well as the autonomy and freedom of choice of individuals. Those decisions need always to be made commensurate with the charter protections that exist. This is why we need to be vigilant in terms of ensuring our decisions are informed by evidence and expertise. Our government is moving to restrike the Joint Committee of Parliamentarians to deliver that expertise and that advice. I hope the official opposition can support us in that endeavour.
L'honorable député de Don Valley Est.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is undeniable that technology is progressing at an unprecedented rate, significantly transforming our society faster than ever. As artificial intelligence continues to advance and reshape the world around us, can the minister share with this House the steps that this government is taking to ensure that Canadians are prepared for the massive societal and ethical implications of artificial intelligence?
L'honorable ministre.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for a very insightful question. As he knows and Canadians know, Canada is a global leader in AIs, and Canadians have created many of the world's best AI innovation. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, Canadians take the potential risk of AI very seriously. That's why we're committed to ensuring that Canadians can trust the AI system. And through our voluntary code of conduct, Mr. Speaker, leading Canadian companies will adopt responsible frameworks for advanced generative AI system to strengthen safety and trust. Mr. Speaker, we will work to ensure that Canada's AI policies are adapted to a rapidly changing world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, today is Child Care Worker Appreciation Day in Ontario. But where is the respect when government keep their wages low? And a new report from the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare shows the staffing crisis is threatening the success of the National Child Care Program. But, Mr. Speaker, this isn't a worker shortage. It's a respect shortage. It's a dignity shortage and a wage shortage. Will the Liberals implement a wage floor of at least $25 an hour for child care workers now?
L'honorable ministre.
Mr. Speaker, the people who take care of our children day in and day out deserve to be well respected and well compensated. Building out a national early learning and child care system takes time, it takes effort, and it takes hard work with our partners. We need to attract, to retain our ECEs across the country, and to do that, we need them to have better working conditions and competitive pay. We've been clear with the provinces and the territories, our partners, that we are working towards that, and we expect that along with them. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Churchill-Kiwatinokaski.
Mr. Speaker, it's time for a wealth tax. Canadians for Tax Fairness reveal that most of us are taking key steps to tackle climate change. At least 90% of us have cut down our carbon footprint by over 3 tons per person in the last 30 years. But the ultra-wealthy are working against us, increasing their pollution by 34 tons per person over that time.
Almost like the government.
As a result of decades of liberal and conservative governments giving the ultra-wealthy a free pass. While Canadians are doing the heavy lifting, why are the Liberals refusing to make the ultra-wealthy pay their fair share?
Then I have Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
NDP is honestly a joke.
Colleague for her question, and I would like to remind her that in a recent podcast on a very popular Canadian show, one of her ex-advisor to the federal NDP and many provincial NDP was asked point blank, "What do you think people will remember of this Liberal government?" And he said, the first government to take climate change seriously in the history of Canada. I agree, Mr. Speaker, with this NDP advisor. We are the first government in the history of Canada to take climate change seriously.
And the biggest joke of a government. So,
a number of
are the two related? I don't know.
Fight climate change, and it's working. We've reduced emissions in Canada by the equivalent of removing 11 million cars from our roads. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And that is the end of question period today. Comme il est 15h27.
All right. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. Lot to unravel from this live stream. I will have a bunch of videos later today on this channel as well as my main one, Mistersunshinebaby. So make sure you subscribe to here. Make sure on your way out you drop a like. There was thousands of people, and we only have 626 likes at the moment of me saying this. So I would appreciate you guys if you dropped a like. Maybe let's get that up to 1,000. And I will see you same time tomorrow. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.